Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. JACALYN. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. JACALYN at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here today on USA Global TV and Radio. I'm Dr. JACALYN KERBECK. I'm the president, founder, and chief listening officer, also the executive producer, here at our network, where we currently have 29 live broadcasts each week. Our show today is The Wise Ones, where we feature people from around the world who are sharing their expertise and their knowledge to help us be better, both personally and professionally. Sharing this screen with me, the star of our show, is Mr. Red O'Loughlin. Red is certainly one of the wise ones for sure. He has more degrees than I can possibly remember. He is a veteran. He has given himself selflessly to serve our country. He also is a man of integrity and honor. Let's welcome him to the show, and then we'll bring out our special guest. Hello, Red.
Hello, Dr. JACALYN. Always a pleasure to hear your introductions. It almost makes me turn red, but thank you so very, very much.
That'd be very apropos. Red is red. I like it.
I was wondering, your 29 live shows per week, when are you going to get that down to 29 live shows per day?
Well, we are actually booking our schedule for next year. So I'm waiting to hear from everyone from our team. And then we have people who are not on our team who want to come in. So we'll see what that looks like probably in the beginning of November. We're getting closer and closer.
Yes, I know I owe you a commitment also on a couple of things. And I recognize that I'm late, but I know there's still just a smidgen worth of time left. And now I will definitely respond.
Fantastic. Well, Red, before we bring out our special guest, Mark Leslie, I want to spotlight you. You certainly have accomplished quite a bit in your life, and you're still out there giving more. I'd like you to focus a little bit today on what we were talking about backstage. You are actually an introvert, but yet you come across as an extrovert. So please tell us more about this.
I believe I've always been an introvert. I'm not one to go out and mingle with people just because they're there. However, in the military, I took the Myers-Briggs and turned out that I was an INSTJ. The SN were very, very close on subsequent tests. I think I've taken it 4 times. INTJ comes up fairly solid. Now, the I tells me I'm an introvert. The other parts deal with the Myers-Briggs assessment of your psychological profile. But it doesn't mean just because you're uncomfortable talking to people, you can't talk to people. And when you look at the typical naval officer, they're usually ESTJs for the most part. I've seen others, but if you had to group them in a category, most of the ones I know are ESTJs, are extroverts, and then the other ones part. So for me, most of the time, I didn't worry about it. I flew my missions. I did what I had to do. If I was in my flight crew, I had a certain responsibility. I would take the leadership role for that because that's what was required for that particular mission. I flew almost 1,000 flights in P-3 aircraft, anti-submarine warfare. Now, not all of those were missions. I flew a lot of missions off of Vietnam early in my career, and then in the Pacific and Atlantic and Indian Oceans since then. But I stopped flying in 1986 and retired from the Navy in 1999 with a little over 31 years. But my introvert I was pretty happy staying in that mode, even in the civilian jobs I've had, because you don't have to get up and speak. You don't have to do all these other things. But then as I started seeing what I wanted to do, what I had a passion for, what I really enjoyed out of life, I realized that I had to change a little bit. And it was a matter literally of taking off the introvert hat and putting on an extrovert hat. And when you put that extrovert hat on, you don't even think about being an introvert anymore. You just go do what you need to do. That did not happen overnight. That took a transition of, I'm going to say, probably 4 to 5 years before I felt comfortable putting the extrovert hat on, walking up, shaking somebody's hands and chatting with them. as opposed to normally I just nod and walk by, or not even nod, just going by. But with the work that I do today with authors, with a lot of networking, I do a lot of speaking. I've never had a problem public speaking. That's usually an indication of an extrovert, but I have never ever had a problem standing up and speaking in front of people. Regardless, when I put my extrovert hat on, that's just part of the things that I do is speak. And I spoke Chamber of Commerce meeting yesterday, and anyway, it's part of what I do nowadays. And being at least seen as an extrovert, open for conversation, open to get to know, that is what's required in my job. As soon as that part of my job's over, I take that hat off, throw it aside, and then put my introvert hat back on, go find a nice comfort chair, grab my book, and then pretend like I know what I'm doing for a while.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was lovely. Well, we've got somebody backstage who's been here before, which I absolutely love, because that's a testament that we might be doing something right if people like to come back. Mark Leslie and I had a great conversation on our other show, which I think was the Corner Bookstore. And he's going to come out and share his expertise and his wisdom. He's a writer and he's a book industry representative. And he also says he's an all-around book nerd. Let's welcome Mark Leslie. Hi there.
Hey, great to see you again, Dr. JACALYN. And Red, I have to say, we must have been separated at birth, not just because we have these awesome matching haircuts, but I'm very introverted as well and do a lot of speaking for author communities. And when I'm on stage and I am on and I know what I need to do, I'm fine. But if I walk into the room, I will shyly go and sit in the corner. So I call myself an omnivert, where I'm an introvert, but I'm able to put it on. Like you said, you put on that hat and you're like, okay, I know what they're looking for. Let's give it to them. And then the minute I come off stage, I become the shy, meek person who doesn't really want to interact with people because I'm not sure how. So I think there's that context as well, right? The context of knowing what's expected of you and then delivering. Almost like in my history as a bookseller, I had a really great manager who said, your job as a bookseller in this store is to deliver the best book buying experience for every single customer who comes in. So you're acting the role of a bookseller and you're playing this role, and you need to be in character the whole time you're on stage, which is in the store. You go in the back room, you can get frustrated, you can get angry, kick things, kick the empty boxes, whatever. But when you get out there, this is your role. And I kind of adapted that for public speaking persona as well, because it really is acting in a way when you're performing that expected role.
You're absolutely right about being in character. You have to know what your character is, who he represents, what's expected. I mean, there's just more than just putting on an extrovert hat and pretending you're an extrovert. You really have to be in character for whether you're being a book representative, a publisher, an author, a public speaker, a resident expert, and whatever it may happen to be. Those are things that, if you're a subject matter expert in publishing, then you ought to be wearing that hat and be a full character that's very knowledgeable and willing to share that knowledge with the world.
Yeah, I agree that 100%.
So, gentlemen, I have a question for both of you. As the name of this show is The Wise Ones, do you think when people are wise, they typically want to share their information to help other people? I know this is a very general question, but we're all, I would say, wise. We're all wise here. I mean, including myself. That's why I hesitated for a second. But we're all wise here, and we're sharing our knowledge. We do public speaking and help other people. So, I don't know. Do you think they come hand in hand? I'll start with you, Mark Leslie.
Yeah, of course. I think part of the thing is recognizing you're never going to stop learning. You're never going to stop growing. I've worked in the book industry for 3 decades. Well, more than 3 decades, 30 years, 92 to 2022. And I'm learning every day. So I have a lot of wisdom. I have a lot of knowledge. I have a lot of things that I've learned about the business of writing and publishing to help other authors, whether it's, the craft of writing, the business of writing, whatever it is. But I'm constantly learning every single day. And one of the best ways to learn is to teach someone what you know. So, by absorbing something, figuring something out, and then trying to disseminate that, trying to share that with someone else is one of the ways that I think we can help ourselves learn even better. Because the other thing we learn from that teaching or the counseling or the mentoring that we can do to help other people maybe in a pay it forward sort of fashion, is recognizing that not everybody learns and absorbs the same way. Some people are auditory, some people need to read it, some people need to, they're visual. Some people need to interact, they need to engage, they need to actually DIY something before they get a grasp on it. So I think it helps us understand there's not just this great information we need to share, but there are different ways that we can share that information that can benefit different people.
Very well said.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Let's go over to you, Red. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm trying to figure out what aspects of sharing knowledge and equaling wisdom there is. I think Mark Leslie did a very good job of summarizing it. But sometimes we have a passion. When I'm talking about health and wellness, which is really where my passion's at, you ask me what time it is, I'll build you a watch. I have no problem giving that extra little bit of information. And we've had conversations where, well, what do you think about this, Red? Or what about that? And I'll say, well, this is it. And it's a sharing of knowledge. And I had a guy yesterday show up, and he was saying in February, he had a very similar situation to mine. He had a DIY double bypass on his heart. He had a artery that was blocked, and the heart grew 2 brand new vessels. And he actually ended up having to have a stent put in. I didn't have to stent put in mine, but the heart grew vessels. It bypassed or worked their way around it. But he's sharing this information with me, and it's something that he doesn't feel comfortable sharing. But because I talk about it, he's sharing it back. And so we had probably a 30-minute conversation after the Chamber of Commerce meeting yesterday, talking about various aspects of, well, do you know what about this? These are things that your doctor never tells you. And I think those are things that are very important, because doctors have a medical, or they have a legal and a moral obligation to fix something when they know you have something wrong. So if you go to the doctor and there's a problem, they're going to do everything in their power to fix that problem. But they have a limit on how much they can help. It has to be, corrective surgery. It has to be this kind of pill, or whatever it may happen to be, this treatment. But those are things that they're limited to. Now, will non-prescription stuff work? More than likely in many cases. Will exercise fix some kind of problem? Maybe. There are other things, but they can't prescribe those because they're not approved by the FDA. But they can't tell people that. And that's where people like me and others, we write our blogs, we give out that information, our speaking, and people can, okay, if I go to my doctor and say, well, what about this? And he says, yeah, we can try that for a couple of months because I suggested it to my doctor. He can make a note saying, patient suggested this, we're going to do it for 2 months, and then recheck. So there's a lot of things we can do, but if we don't get that knowledge out and share it, then what good is our wisdom? We're just here getting smarter, but we're not making any impact on our world.
Thank you, Red. I appreciate it. Mark Leslie, question I have for you. You just mentioned that you've been working with authors for over 30 years. That's a long time. Can you share what that journey has been like and what you're taking away from it?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, ever since I was a child, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I loved storytelling. I loved the experience of captivating somebody, whether most often fiction, but it can be nonfiction where you're sharing an experience. And we're all born storytellers in one way, shape, or form. Usually, around the dinner table at night, everyone talks about their day, what happened. That's storytelling. You go back to caveman times. Some of the paintings are explanations of where we found this meat and how we achieved this thing that we're sitting there sharing. So I was always interested in storytelling, and so I started off in traditional publishing. I sold some stories to small press magazines. I got my first story finally published after hundreds of rejections in 1992, the same year I started working in the book industry. And I worked in the book industry because, well, I had a degree in English language and literature. I tried to get into teachers college. I couldn't. My grades weren't high enough. What else can I do? I went retail, and I realized I found my home. I've always been a book lover. From the time I sat on my mom's knee and she would read stories to me, to I was devouring books way ahead of my peers in school. I loved reading it. It was, comic books and books, whatever I could get my hands on, I would read. So I knew books would be an integral part of my life. I obviously wanted to be a writer too. Then when I realized that I could actually work in a field which was about putting the right books into the hands of readers, I realized that magic can happen when you do that. And while book selling in retail doesn't pay very well, my soul was paid. I was fed. It was intrinsic reward to get to do this for a living. Over the years, I moved on. I've worked in almost every kind of bookstore. The only two types of bookstores I haven't worked for are a Christian bookstore or a used bookstore. But I've worked in academic, I've worked in independent, I've worked in big box, I've worked in chain, I've worked in online, I've worked in ebook. So I've worked for pretty much every kind of bookseller. And as I've grown and published my own books, worked with publishers, so I have the experience of self-publishing, I have the experience of working with other publishers. What I've really wanted to do, and I really started to do this a lot more since about 2017, was seeing what I could do to take some of this knowledge and experience and to help writers, to help them realize that if you want to be a storyteller, if you want to write your stories, if you want to publish your stories, you've never had more opportunity, more options, more choices than ever in the history of writing and publishing. And so trying to help provide information, provide insights, provide encouragement, remind them not to give up, remind them of the thousands of rejections I still have for all the stories I tried to get published or whatever, and remind them that it's a long-term thing. And the other thing that's important to me is sometimes the goal isn't necessarily to sell a lot of books and make a lot of money. Sometimes the goal is just creating a story with a single reader in mind. Which is what Stephen King does. Stephen King addresses constant reader in his books all the time. And he's revealed in his book on writing, he's writing his books for a single person, his wife, Tabitha King. Will Tabby like this book? And he focuses on just making that the experience. And fortunately, it's worked out okay for him. I think the kid'll do okay for himself in the grand scheme of things when it comes to writing. But yeah, so that's sort of my passion in storytelling, is that connection. When I create a story, when I create nonfiction, aimed at helping other writers, it's all about connecting with another person and sharing something that I think is either going to entertain them, inform them, inspire them in some way, or as I'm interacting with other writers, what can I do to help them understand who their target audience is? What can I help them to understand about the choices they have so that they can make the most informed choices? And I honestly, even though I've worked in the industry for 30 years, it's hard to feel like I've worked a day in my life, because it felt like I was just engaging in passion. And when I release a project, sometimes it's the passion that rewards me. So if I happen to sell a lot of copies of a book or earn some decent money off the book, that's gravy, because the passion of sharing that story was sometimes what motivated me. And for writers to recognize, you don't have to be a New York Times bestseller to be successful. What is success, and how do you define success? A grandfather who may want to have always told his life story, to have his 5 grandchildren read that story, that may be the penultimate success for that grandfather, and the reason that he wanted to share his story, read his book. So everyone has their own way of defining that. And I want to help writers recognize there's no one path. There's no one right way of doing things. The right way of doing things is first something that feeds you intrinsically, but then also, is it something that can entertain, inspire, empower, inform other people?
The industry that you talked about, looking at your website and kind of getting prepared for today, and before we go to break here shortly, the voice from Kobo, the face and the voice, Mark from Kobo, I think is the way you have it on your website. Could you tell us a little bit more about Mark from Kobo?
Sure. So, as you can tell, my last name is Lefebvre, and I've always written under Mark Leslie. Leslie was my middle name, only because people could never spell or pronounce Lefebvre. But then I got known in the book industry as Mark Lefebvre. I've worked in the industry for a long time. It was around the year 2011 when I was hired by Kobo. So Kobo is Canada's answer to Kindle, ebook company, and it was born out of Canada's largest bookseller here in Canada. And the Kobo device, Kobo is an anagram for book, is primarily an ebook platform. They have audiobooks now, but when I joined, it was an ebook platform, and I was hired to come up with a solution to make it easier for small publishers and self-published authors to get their books into Kobo's catalog, which is available in 170 countries around the world, and also partnered with major book retailers in about 15 or 16 territories around the world. And so my solution that I came up with, now I came up with the idea that really, really smart developers did the hard work, like it was the brainchild behind Kobo Writing Life. And I became known as Mark from Kobo because I would do talks and I would say, my name is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. And they'd say, well, how do you pronounce your last name? And I would say, from Kobo. And so that was an interesting inside joke that I used as I was doing the talks. And then I left Kobo after that platform was just so successful and there wasn't really anywhere for me to go. So I wanted to break off and do independent consulting, etc. And then I joined Draft 2 Digital, which is an Oklahoma-based company that provides free self-publishing services for authors in a digital fashion. So my cheeky nickname then became Mark 2 Digital. Again, just if I can prevent anyone from having to struggle through trying to pronounce my last name, Lefebvre, then maybe I've done a good deed for the world.
Well, Dr. JACALYN, unless you have a real quick question, I think it's just about time to go to break, don't you think?
Yes, I do. We will take a quick break and hear from some of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. So please do stay with us. There's a lot more to learn from Mark Leslie.
Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Story Garden. Your host, Diane Boehm. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Diane Floyd Boehm tells wonderful stories that warm the heart, spark the imagination, and unite people and families across generations. For children, Diane's Harry the Camel connects with all of us who've ever wondered how different our lives might have been if only we'd been born something better, like a wonderful horse instead of an ordinary camel. In the end, we all learn along with Harry that there's nothing better than just being yourself. Diane's Little Girl in the Moon looks down on earthbound children and wonders if they know she's just like them. A story of love, home, and the bond between mother and daughter, its powerful theme that we're each of us different yet all of us the same plants a seed in children that promises to blossom within a loving and trusting grown-up. Diane's new biography, Rise, recounts the experiences of her grandmother, Ruby, to reveal the hidden strength of the human spirit. Ruby's story inspires all of us to become the best versions of ourselves. You'll find all of Diane's delightful books and much more at DianeFloydBoehm.com. Visit DianeFloydBoehm.com. That's DianeFloydBoehm.com.
The session that we had with BCAT was really entertaining and enlightening. We were able to put together some very specific steps that we as individuals can take, and it was really fun to all come together and see sort of where we're going as a team and how we can all get there together.
We had a tremendous experience with the BCAT partners. One of the challenges that we have as an organization is to make sure that we have the right people in the right chairs doing the right thing. To do that well, you have to have synergy. You can try to dream up ways to make sure that your group does that, or you can rely on experts. We would recommend BCAT partners to anybody who's looking to take their organization to the next level.
thank you for staying with us through the break. This is USA Global TV and Radio, and I'm still Dr. JACALYN KERBECK, and our show today is The Wise Ones. Let's get back to the show with Mr. Red O'Laughlin. Hello.
Howdy.
Nice to have you back with us. And also our special guest, Mark Leslie, who is a writer and book industry representative. We didn't even get to the all-around book nerd yet, but we will. So, Mark Leslie, what do you mean when you say that you are a book industry representative?
So I've been a bookseller, my entire life, and I still actually would define myself as a bookseller. But a lot of people would think, well, but you don't work in a bookstore right now, or whatever. I have spent probably from about 2011 onwards representing aspects of the industry. So I was a representative for Kobo, working for Kobo Writing Life and their self-publishing platform, and now I'm known in various author circles as a guy who's worked in the industry for a long time, but also known as I'm the director of business development for Draft to Digital. Again, drafttodigital.com, a place that offers free services to convert books into EPUBs and distribute them so that authors can have these tools accessible to them and save them the time of all the logistics of publishing so that they can get on to the writing, the thing that they're probably most passionate about anyways. And so when I'm at various industry events and author events, I'm representing an element of the book industry. And when I'm hired as a consultant, one-on-one by authors or from agents or publishers who want to learn more about, specifically, my passion probably for the past 12 years has been digital publishing and the opportunities that present themselves there, starting with the espresso book machine, the print-on-demand machine that I owned in the last bookstore where I was a manager, where you could print and bind a book in 15 minutes on the spot, or the ability of the magic of and power of digital audiobooks and digital ebooks and all the different systems and solutions that exist to empower authors and publishers and agents. I'm almost every aspect of the industry. So that book industry representative is sort of an all-inclusive, I can represent the industry as an author, as a passionate author who can speak about the fiction I write or the true ghost stories I write, which kind of explain the skulls and stuff in the background. The paranormal urban fantasy tales I write, but also the books that I write for, and those are the ones I write under the full long name that nobody can pronounce, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, books about, an author's guide to working with bookstores and libraries. So that book industry representative really is a catch-all for all of the different hats that I tend to wear when I'm speaking about the book business in general, or the business of writing and publishing.
I'd like to go down the writing path just a little bit because you don't have a whole lot of reference to being a beer nerd. And in your blogs on Spirits Untapped, use 5,000 beers you've rated or something like that over the last since you've been 18, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, maybe only about 10 years, but actually that's I have to say it's over 6,000 unique beers. So yeah, I'm really passionate about craft beers, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I look at things like what I'm passionate about in terms of the industry, I'm passionate about independent creators and the power that we have, whether it's independent musicians, whether it's locally owned businesses, whether it's independent authors who are, taking the reins in their own hands and self-publishing and just being in charge as small publishers themselves. Craft beer, I've always loved beer. And when I traveled, even before craft beer, it's become a thing in the last 10 years than ever before. But when I traveled, I always would ask, well, what's made locally? Because I wanted to try something that I couldn't have back home, like what's brewed locally, and I would drink that. That became the craft beer movement. At the time, I downloaded the app Untapped, have that sort of check in, and it's just a way for me to track and rate the different beers I've had. It's also something to do when I'm traveling by myself, so there's nobody to talk to. I'm rating the beer and I'm looking to see what my friends are drinking. Sometimes it's a great conversation starter. I've made friends sitting at the bar because someone goes, "Oh, you use Untapped too," and you can. It's this kind of a social networking. Think of it like Goodreads is a place where book nerds can come together and share books they've loved. And Untapped is like, Goodreads for beer nerds. And so that's been a bit of a passion. Now, the Spirits Untapped website you mentioned is my partner Liz and I, who we did meet. Our very first date was at a brewery. We met there to have a quick drink. It turned into a dinner and dessert and coffee and obviously a long-term relationship. But we love experiencing craft beer together. So we travel a lot. And because I've written ghost stories, we are in the process and have been working on research for a book called Spirits Untapped, which will be haunted bars and breweries. And that means that the great thing about me going and enjoying some of these beers, and some of the places happen to be old buildings that are haunted and are now a brewery, or bars and restaurants that have that sort of history, is those are all tax write-offs for me because I'm working on the ghosts. Now, ironically, sometimes the ghost stories get even better the longer the night goes on and the more alcohol people have consumed.
My daughter worked at a prison for a while here in Texas, and she has had a couple up-close experiences with ghosts. One was a convict inmate who literally walked through a wall in front of her. She thought the guy was alive, and then she was on guard duty, and this one particular George, I think is the ghost name, has been known there forever, loves to play with her blonde hair. And so she'd feel somebody toking up, and she turned, of course, there's nobody there, but it became the standard. But prisons are another place that you probably find some untapped spirits.
Yes. I did write a book. I co-authored a book with Rhonda Parrish called Haunted Hospitals a few years ago. And we included a section on sanatoriums and prisons and other institutions, especially because when you look at the history, there was a time when an insane asylum and a prison and a sanatorium may all have been combined into one. And so you had, patients, mentally ill patients who needed treatment and help were stuck beside, homicidal killers. And so it was almost like a nightmare on earth. So we didn't, prisons, we kind of wrote about some prisons just sort of as an additional leverage because of the tie-in to a lot of historic places that happen to be a little bit of both. But man, I'd love to learn more about that particular prison. And but you said George was the name of that ghost there?
I'm pretty sure that's what everybody called him. He'd been around forever and ever and ever, but she's a deputy sheriff now. She no longer works in that prison, but right. I'd be more than happy to introduce you to and let you chat a little bit.
Thank you. always doing research.
I love it. So Mark, Leslie, for people who are out there, and I've asked you this before, and they think to themselves, wow, he's been doing this for 30 years and I can't even write a simple chapter about anything. What would you say to them?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. I say that don't be too hard on yourself. It can take some time. We're recording this in the middle of October 2022, and November's coming up, and there is a movement called NaNoWriMo, and it's short for National Novel Writing Month. And November has 30 days, and it's typically, so it's American Thanksgiving. You're gearing up for the holidays. It's only 30 days. And the founder of NaNoWriMo said, if you can commit to sitting down and writing 1,666 words per day for 30 days, at the end of the month, you'll have 50,000 words, and you may have actually finished the book you've been working on forever. And so the thought is, and if you can do it at roughly one of the busiest times of the year for a lot of people, especially in North America, then you can do it anytime. And so one of the things I love about NaNoWriMo is you're not suffering alone. Misery loves company. So it's kind of like, think of the writer as the stressed out writer in front of the keyboard and sweating and bleeding onto the page, etc. But you're part of these communities. And here in Waterloo, Ontario, where I live, there's a great community of people who will get together at one of the branches of the Waterloo Public Library on particular nights and just have a write-in. And I remember going to the first writing, because I tend to need a quiet environment to get my writing done, because I'm too easily distracted by all the things out there. But I was sitting in the room, and there was about 30 other writers there, and they said, okay, we're just going to write for 20 minutes. Just go and just write whatever. And I sat there and I looked around, and again, I've published 30 books. I looked around and everyone was hard at work, and I was sitting there going, oh, I guess I better write something now, because I'm a bit of an introvert, but when I'm in the midst of a of a social setting, I want to engage with people. That's kind of a thing that I do. I can kind of turn it on in those moments. But I was so inspired by seeing 30 other people working head down, either writing, handwriting, or typing. And I just went and I just started writing stream of consciousness. So I wasn't even the book I'd planned on working on. I was just thinking about the book. And instead of thinking about it, I was just writing every thought that came into my brain. After about 3 paragraphs, I transitioned to writing a scene from the book. So for people who are having trouble, I learned this from, oh my God, grade 10. Gary Furman, a wonderful teacher that I had who taught English, he used to have a free writing section of our English class where he said, this whole class, there's no lesson. I just want you to write. You've got the whole class to do whatever you want. He says you could do, you play hangman. You can just doodle. You can do sketch. You can do homework from another class. You can write a story, write poetry, whatever you feel like. All I need is for you to turn it in. And it doesn't matter. You could turn in like a smiley face and just, that's it. That's what you did. And that's it. And you would get a grade if you turned something in and nothing if you turned nothing in. And I learned from those moments, because I wrote so many stories in that class, that just opening up and writing the thoughts that were coming into my mind could help sort of grease the wheels of my imagination, grease the wheels of that writer's block or whatever it was. And then once I started expressing, once I started sharing those stories or started putting my thoughts out on paper, it's almost like it woke up the muse, and the muse came in and said, oh, you want to tell a story about whatever? And then you could just transition into the story. Because what you can do is when you have a lot of words on paper, you can remove the words, you can cut them, you can get rid of the stuff that's not part of the story or part of whatever. But you first have to have the words on paper, and they don't have to be the right words. So you can kind of just like spew it all out, get it all out, and then worry about making it better later on. So I think one of the things that often troubles or frustrates writers is they think it needs to be perfect when it comes out and onto paper. No. That's what your second and third and fourth and fifth drafts are for. That's what working with a great developmental editor can help you with. You have the gist, you have the diamond in the rough, and then later you can work on refining it and making it that magical, wonderful thing, which is the book you probably, or the story that you probably envisioned all along.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, Red, go ahead.
You just mentioned you had 30 books that you've written. Is the one you released earlier this week, the Canadian Mountain, your latest one?
It is, yeah. The Canadian Mountain is definitely a passion project for... are you familiar with where that book comes from?
No, I enjoyed the cover, though. I'll tell you that.
So this year's the 35th anniversary of the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It starred John Candy, Steve Martin, John Hughes. It was John Hughes' first sort of foray into adult films. So before then, he was known for Ferris Bueller's Day Off and The Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and teen angst movies. This was his first adult movie. And Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, 35 years, anniversary this year, has become a perennial, almost like, Scrooged or Christmas Carol or Home Alone or National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation or Toy Story, Christmas Story. And it's one that comes up every Thanksgiving because the premise of it is an uptight executive, Neil Page, played by Steve Martin, is on his way on a regular commute from New York City with business meeting to get back to home for Chicago in time for Thanksgiving. He meets John Candy's character, Del Griffith, who is a traveling salesman. He's a shower curtain ring salesman for American Light and Fixture, and he's traveling on his way to Chicago as well. The plane gets rerouted to Wichita, and it's this odd couple adventure of this uptight executive and a sort of a blabbermouth but lovable salesman, and the two of them stuck together as they're trying to find their way back. Obviously, the plane is the first thing. Then they take a train that breaks down, and then there's buses and taxi cabs and car rentals and all the different ways that they get across the country. So it's this lovely classic that I've probably watched, I'd have to say 50 times minimum. at least once a year, because I have the benefit of both Canadian Thanksgiving, which we just celebrated in October, and then there's the American Thanksgiving, which is the bigger one. We're just kind of warming everyone up every year. And the Canadian Mounted, the reason the book is called that is when John Candy and Steve Martin's characters first meet at the New York airport, they first officially meet. John Candy's character, and John Candy was a Canadian actor, is reading this book called The Canadian Mounted. And he's reading this book, and it's described in the script as a pornographic novel. And it's obviously a cheeky nod to John Candy's Canadian heritage. Haha, nice little Easter egg for people. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if there was actually a book called that? Because I actually thought when I first started researching this that it was a prop book. Because Ryan Reynolds, Canadian actor, also used the book or had the prop department make a mock-up of the Canadian Mounted that he used in the Deadpool movies, where he had his character Wade reading it as a sort of nod to John Candy. And when I was doing more research, I learned that this was actually a real book published in the 80s by Beeline, and they did, adult erotic literature. And so I was able to do more research, and I realized that there was enough. I have over 150 pieces of trivia about the movie, about how John Hughes was inspired to do it based on an actual trip he took that was rerouted to Wichita. The fact that he wrote the script in 3 days, the fact that the original screenplay, and I got my hands on 2 versions of the screenplays, the fact that I think it was 6 hours worth of film. And then the original version of the film was over 2 hours, and they had to cut it down to an hour and a half after the test audience, working with test audiences. So even when you look at the trailer, there's a whole bunch of scenes from the original theatrical trailer release that didn't even make it to the final cut. There's actually almost half the trailer is not visible. So as somebody who's just so passionate about this book, I was so thrilled to be able to put the book together, release the book, and have it available, obviously, in time for American Thanksgiving. But it's funny, you can tell when people see the cover of the book, if they're intimately familiar with the film like I am, they go, that's the book John Candy was reading. And so that's just been so fun. And that just came out a couple days ago, the original release, but we're gearing up to do some more promotion for it as we get closer to, obviously, the big event, American Thanksgiving.
Well, Mark Leslie, it's been great having you on here. We're getting ready to close things up. Why don't you take a minute and tell people how they can get in touch with you? What value do you give? Who are you looking for? How can you help? So just kind of give us a minute or so, and we'll go ahead and start ending the show.
Great. Thanks so much. It was great to chat with you guys. You can find out all you want about me and things you don't want to know about me over at markleslie.ca. If you're interested in learning about the industry, under consulting, I have a free 20-minute consult. You can chat with me. Just ask me any questions you want. And if you're interested in entertainment, of course, there's links to all of my books off of my website. Thank you guys again so much.
Okay, for our audio audience and on the podcast that show up, Mark, M-A-R-K, Leslie, L-E-S-L-I-E. So markleslie.ca, not com, but .ca. So yeah. MARKLESLIE.ca. Hey, Mark, I just really and truly enjoyed our conversation today. And as with almost any part of USA Global TV and Radio Network, there are many options, and I would love to have you come back another day, because we only touched very briefly on the real Mark Leslie, and I'm sure there's some other nuggets in there, just like the Canadian Mounted, that we just happened to touch upon that our audience would love to know more about.
Well, thank you so much.
So again, thank you very, very much, Mark Leslie, and I look forward to, I will be in touch with you, contact with my daughter about the ghosts, and I look forward to reading more on your website. So,
thanks so much, Red.
Have a great time. Bye now. This is Red O'Loughlin, and we're getting ready to close out the wise ones for today on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. I am a speaker, a writer, an author, a publisher. I can be reached on my contact information that's on my website, which is redolaughlin.com. That's red like the color, R-E-D, O'Loughlin, spelled OLAUGHLIN.com. So redolaughlin.com. In the banner, all my contact information is there. And thank you very much again, Dr. JACALYN, for another wonderful show today. And I'm going to bid everybody adieu, and we will catch you next week. Have a wonderful time.